Story 1. The United States hasn't minted any new Purple Heart medals since World War II. We've been using the stockpile that was prepared in anticipation of a ground invasion of Japan. Story 2. Schizophrenia's hallucinations are shaped by culture. Americans with schizophrenia tend to have more paranoid and harsher voices and hallucinations. In India and Africa, people with schizophrenia tend to have more playful and positive voices. Story 3. All 6 of the stars of Friends negotiated 2% syndication rights for the show. Friends still makes about $1 billion yearly through reruns and Hulu. All 6 Friends collect a $20 million check annually. Yes, that means David Schwimmer still gets $20 million a year for doing nothing. So when you are alone in your one-bedroom apartment, watching Friends and snickering about how any of them are losers who haven't been famous since, there's a reason why. They don't have to work ever again. Story 4. The Giza Sphinx is so old that it was the ancient Egyptians themselves who performed the first restoration after digging it from under the dunes, over 1,000 years after it had been built. Story 5. Over the space of 3 days, an estimated 165 people survived both the Hiroshima and Nagasaki nuclear bomb attacks. Tsutomu Yamaguchi is one of the more famous ones, who was only 2 miles from ground zero when the bomb was dropped on Hiroshima. It hit when he was walking to work on the last day of a work trip. After he heard the drone of a plane, he looked up at it and the sky lit up. He was then plucked from the ground, spun around, and tossed into a nearby potato field. Miraculously, he survived, despite being covered in burns, soaked in radiation, and with 2 blown eardrums. He spent a night in an air shelter, then took an overnight sleeper train home to Nagasaki to see his family. When he made it to a hospital in Nagasaki, he was so burnt a childhood friend didn't recognize him. Neither did his family. Despite his wounds, he made it to work the next day. He started giving his boss a rundown on what happened, and his boss thought he was crazy. There was no way one bomb could destroy a city. Suddenly, a bright light lit up the room. He panicked and dropped to the floor of the office seconds before the shockwave smashed out the office windows. He had just been hit twice by a nuclear blast in the space of 3 days. At the age of 93, he was given the title Nijiu Hibakusha, or twice-bombed person. He died the next year. So next time you think you're having a bad week at work, yeah. Story 6. Google's DeepMind self-learning artificial intelligence, AlphaZero, spent 4 hours learning chess and proceeded to beat the top chess engine in the world. The particularly interesting part is that it wins by playing in a very human way. Chess engines tend to run algorithms to assess a board after a move is chosen, looking at millions of moves every second, and decide who is better based on a set of parameters, making their play very direct. AlphaZero seemed to develop a far more human playstyle, somehow seeing something less quantifiable that led to an advantage in a position. Over the past 200 years, numerous chess masters studied a style of play similar to AlphaZero. That means that in 4 hours, AlphaZero developed a better understanding of the game than we could over the 1,000+ years it has been studied. Story 7. Lobsters don't die of old age. Taking into consideration that humanity has only explored a small percentage of the ocean, there could very well be a very large lobster just chilling out there. Apparently, the square cube law prevents super huge lobsters, but there are still some pretty big ones out there that we don't really get to see. I saw one on the internet that was 4 feet long, had 2-foot-long legs, and weighed 14 pounds. Still pretty cool. Story 8. Probably too late for this to be seen. But if you take into account the fact that on average people sleep or should sleep 8 hours a day, if and when you reach 99 years of age, you will have only been awake for 66 years, having spent 33 years of your life sleeping. That's why I always stay up late. Story 9. As you get closer to a black hole, time goes slower. This means that everything farther away would experience time faster and faster as you get closer and closer to the black hole. A second for you could be 1 billion years for those outside of it. Thus, if you fell into a black hole and looked outside, you would see the universe die with you. Story 10. When The Next Generation first aired, data was roughly 60,000 times faster than the fastest computer on Earth. Today, he is roughly 500 times slower than the current fastest computer. Story 11. The moon orbits us from the west to the east, but we see it move across the sky east to west because of the rate of the Earth's rotation. Our observation is like being in a faster car watching a slower car, heading in the same absolute direction, fall further and further behind us. Story 12. Due to the way the speed of light works, combined with our current understanding of the expansion of the universe, there are areas of the universe that are both impossible for us to visit or even observe. The fabric of the universe expands faster over that distance than light can travel, so it never reaches us. When you combine that with the part where scientists currently think there are roughly 1 trillion visible galaxies, 4 times more stars than exist in the Milky Way, well then, Story 13. There was a time in history when trees existed, but the fungi that cause wood to rot had not yet evolved to digest wood. Dead trees and plants would pile up, and the 35% oxygen atmosphere caused massive fires. This is also the time from which petrified wood came. Trees would sit in mud for thousands of years and not rot while minerals slowly replaced the wood structures. Story 14. Charlemagne's name translates to Charles the Great. This wasn't due to his leadership. This was due to the fact that he was 6 feet 4 inches tall when the average male was 5 feet 6 inches tall. His name was just Big Charlie. Story 15. Bing Crosby advocated for salmon conservation in the North Atlantic against Denmark's overfishing in the early 1970s. The Danish government banned everything related to Bing Crosby in Denmark, but because he was so popular there, the Danish people protested the government, causing them to overturn the Bing Crosby law and even enact salmon conservation legislation. Bing Crosby single-handedly managed to create a piece of Danish law. Edit. Did not expect this to get so big. Here is my evidence for the unconvinced. In 1971, the Committee on the Atlantic Salmon Emergency enlisted the help of celebrities to publicize their efforts to convince the Danes to restrain their salmon fleet. One was Bing Crosby, who was part Danish. An enraged Danish government banned the sale of Crosby's records, only to discover that he was incredibly popular in Denmark. The move backfired and produced an outpouring of public support for both the crooner and the salmon. David R. Montgomery, King of Fish. The 1,000-Year Run of Salmon, Cambridge, Westview, 2003, 114. Story 16. The Titanic had 2 sister ships, the Britannic and the Olympic. There was a woman called Violet Jessup, a nurse and a cruise liner stewardess who worked on all 3. The Olympic crashed into a warship while leaving harbor but was able to make it back. She was on the Titanic as it sank and is referenced in the Titanic film, a stewardess who was told to set an example to the non-English-speaking passengers as the ship sank. She looked after a baby on Lifeboat 16 until being rescued by the Carpathia the next day. It is not known what exactly caused the sinking of the Britannic, but the lifeboats hit the water too early. As the ship sank, the rear listed up and a number of the lifeboats were sucked into the propellers. Violet had to jump out of the lifeboat she was in and sustained a serious head injury but survived. She was on board for all 3 incidents in the space of 5 years. She went back to continue to work at sea for another 30 years before retiring in 1950. She died of heart failure at 71. Story 17. China used more concrete in 3 years than the United States used in the entire 20th century. Story 18. If the sun were scaled down to the size of a white blood cell, the Milky Way galaxy would be the size of the continental United States. The vastness of space is mind-boggling. Story 19. The United States dropped 26,172 bombs last year, which was 2016. That's almost 72 per day. That's about 3 bombs an hour every hour for the entire year. In 2017, the United States had already dropped more bombs than that by September. Story 20. When NASA pitched the idea of the Voyager missions to Richard Nixon with the idea of touring the outer planets, he was told that the last time it was possible, Thomas Jefferson was in the White House. The particular planetary alignment that Voyager 2 used on its journey occurs only once every 176 years. Story 21. You do not remember being born or most of the first years of your existence. All you know is that one day you just started existing and began taking in experiences and memories. Story 22. Your body consists of roughly a 1-to-1 ratio of bacterial to human cells. Story 23. All that stuff you learn about in history class about civilizations rising up and dying out, about certain groups killing off other groups and taking over their lands, that is still happening right now. Story 24. The United Kingdom Dyslexia Association is situated in Reading, Berkshire, United Kingdom, not the Pennsylvania one. Story 25. Dozens of Americans die every day from slipping in the shower and hitting their heads. Dozens, I tell you. It is one of the primary leading causes of non-medical deaths in the United States. Story 26. There is more than one type of infinity, and they aren't all the same size. From zero down in negative numbers, infinite. From zero up in positive numbers, also infinite. Combine them, still infinite but bigger than either on their own. A professor at the university told me that, and it blew my mind. Story 27. The Teotihuacan pyramids, known to be the most architecturally significant Mesoamerican pyramids, were not built by the Aztecs. The Aztecs found it abandoned, settled there, and gave it its name. The origin of its founders is still a mystery. Apparently, there are some recent theories regarding the Teotihuacan pyramids and why they were abandoned before being occupied by the Aztecs. The comments are enlightening. Story 28. Sharks predate trees. The oldest shark fossils we know of are 420 to 450 million years old. The oldest known tree is Watiza, about 385 million years old. Story 29. Afghanistan produces 90% of the world's opium. Since the United States invasion of Afghanistan, opium production and distribution around the world has skyrocketed. All of the opioids that Americans are using in epidemic numbers? Guess where it's coming from? Fun fact. Story 30. Your computer is much more likely to contract a virus by surfing legitimate church sites than by surfing pornography sites. Pornography sites generally have experts combating viruses, while church sites are maintained by lower-tech volunteers as a rule. Story 31. Udvata, the longest-living animal ever, was a giant tortoise given to Clive of India. He was born around 1750 and died in 2006. He existed longer than the United States has. Story 32. If you choose not to have children, you are the first person in your direct ancestry, all the way back to the first humans related to you, to not have children. Others have informed me that it goes as far back as all organisms since life evolved on Earth. I hadn't thought of that. Story 33. Stegosaurus lived 150 million years ago. T. Rex lived 65 million years ago. Stegosaurus was more ancient to the T. Rex than the T. Rex is to us. Story 34. Astronomer here. I always like that the coldest place we know of in the universe is on Earth. Even a dense dust cloud, also known as coldest spots we know of, are a few degrees above absolute zero, the coldest temperature there is. In laboratories on Earth, however, it's quite common to get a few fractions of a degree above absolute zero for experiments. Therefore, Story 35. The city of Atlanta in Texas is closer to Atlanta, Georgia, a city 3.5 states away, than it is to El Paso, Texas. That is just how big Texas is. Also, Bristol, Tennessee is closer to Canada than it is to Memphis, Tennessee. Story 36. About 1 million people die every year from mosquito bites. That's 2,700 per day, or 100 every hour. Think about how many must have died since you started reading this prompt. Story 37. The passage tombs at Newgrange, Knowth, and Douth are older than the Great Pyramids or Stonehenge. Story 38. If there have existed 1 billion alien races out there since the universe began, all with the capability of light-speed intergalactic travel, the chance of just one of those races existing during the same time period as humanity, roughly 200,000 years, is less than 10%. The chance of that likely alien race being within 200,000 light-years of Earth is 0.000015%. So, basically, if there were 1 billion hyper-advanced alien races in the universe, there is only a 0.000015% chance that one would ever reach us. If you try to consider all the possible races that exist but don't have intergalactic travel capability, yeah, you could say I strongly believe aliens exist. Story 39. The universe is so empty that if we took 3 grains of sand and placed them inside a vast cathedral, that cathedral would be more filled with sand than the universe is with stars. Story 40. We are arguably in the middle of the 6th mass extinction event on Earth, the last ending the dinosaurs. Current estimates suggest that 50% of species on Earth will be extinct by 2050. Sorry for the downer, but it does threaten life on Earth as we understand it. Let that sink in. Story 41. Average hours of minimum wage work needed to pay for 4 years of public college. Baby boomers 306. Millennials 4,459. Source: Highline Huffington Post.